Hello, everyone, to our gardening series of 12 months of nectar and pollen producing plants. My name is David Rodriguez, horticulturalist here in Bexar County in San Antonio with the AgriLife Extension Service. Real quick, what the Extension Service is, we're the educational arm of the land-grant university, Texas A&M University. We have a unique partnership in 254 counties in our great state of Texas. We are funded separately than the university in a unique partnership with county and the state. So welcome to our presentation, and let's learn a little bit about having color and beautiful plants 12 months out of the year in your garden and landscape. So that's a picture of me, David Rodriguez, and our beautiful children's vegetable garden program. So when we talk about vegetable gardening, we not only talk about the specifics on vegetables, but also trying to have some color plants in the vegetable garden as well as in and around your landscape. So our focus today is predominantly on your landscape plants to bring in those bees and beneficial insects 12 months out of the year. So the main thing is nectar and producing and pollen producing plants. The key here is planting a diversity of plants that bloom throughout the year, both a combination of native and well-adapted species. We're going to focus quite a bit of plants that are a combination of both native and introduced species that are part of our Texas Superstar Plant Program. If you're not familiar with our Texas Superstar Plant Program, San Antonio has always been the hub of this program, with the first plant statewide to help the highway department and us as home gardeners was our beautiful state flower, the Texas Bluebonnet. So we have about 92 plants, which are predominantly ornamental plants, predominantly perennial plants. We do have a few vegetables and then a few fruit trees, but mainly annuals and predominantly perennial plants. So not all the slides, but a good chunk of the plants that we're going to be showing you are hardy perennial plants, being Texas Superstar plants. To familiarize yourself more on the Texas Superstar Plant Program, we invite you to go to our Hagee Horticulture website, which is the largest website presence on the Texas A&M University system, since gardening is still this #1 hobby for most people in this country. Well, let's start out with January. We know January is the coldest month of the year, so there's really not too many plants really blooming out in our garden. So the picture that we see with the little bee there and the pollen on her hind legs is a broccoli plant. This specific broccoli is called Green Magic broccoli, which is the best extension recommended broccoli. So we plant our first planting of third leaf transplants around early to mid-September. That crop usually comes in around Thanksgiving dinner. And our best planting is early to mid-October, which comes in for Christmas dinner. And then you harvest your big terminal head, and then you have the lateral shoots. So we kind of let these go through the month of January, let them bloom. And you all know how the weather is here in January. You wake up in the morning, you have your heater on, and then some days we have, by 2 o'clock, you have the air conditioner on, all in the same day. So we want to really focus on trying to let a few of these bloom. We let them bloom about 2, maybe 3 weeks. So on those nice warm afternoons, the beneficial insects, just like this little bee that we see here, are out there harvesting nectar and going to these plants. So let them bloom. And you can also include maybe kale plants, broccoli, maybe cabbage, and your ornamental cabbage and ornamental flowering kale as well, to let them flower, but no more than about 2 weeks or so. So January, we have what we call a naturalizing bulb, and these are Paperwhites Narcissus. So there's a lot of different ones sowed during the holiday seasons of Christmas, and people buy the little bulbs, they bring them inside and force them in gravel or in containers, and then we have the unique fragrance through the holiday season. So try to look for ones that are called naturalizing. You're going to pay a little bit more for them, and then you set them out in the landscape in an area that drains well and gets a good amount of sunlight. But when these plants flower, they make an excellent, long-lasting, colorful flower, fragrant flower inside the house. And of course, the nectar that they produce and the pollen brings in bees and other beneficial insects into your garden. So January and February is very important, early, you might say, to bring in these bees and beneficial insects, because once we start planting March, April, early May, our cucurbit-like crops of cucumbers, broccoli, cucumbers, and plants like that, squash and zucchini, we want to our little bee friends and our beneficial insects to know that, hey, January and February is finished. They planted these plants, and then we'll come and help pollinate them as well. So this plant here is a shrub type plant, Primrose Jasmine, for February. And not all these plants that we're showing you bloom just at these months. These are kind of specific months for in and around the San Antonio area when they're in peak bloom, you might say. So the highway department uses this plant quite a bit. So it's a very, very drought tolerant, very low input plant once established. It's what you call a clavering type shrub. Means it has upright growth and kind of a vine-like appearance when it cascades down to the bottom. Bumblebees, regular bees, and many beneficial insects really adore this old-fashioned shrub-like plant. It's not that fragrant as Confederate star jasmine and sandbag jasmine and those other type of white flowering jasmines, but it's a very reliable, hardy landscape type of a plant to consider adding to your landscape. This is what we call cemetery iris. And cemetery iris in the month of February and March has other names. We call it German bearded irises, and a poor man's orchid is another name. If you look at the rhizome of this plant, it looks kind of like a ginger root. So normally in late fall, early winter, we find these what they call flags. It's the root, the rhizome, and a hand or the flag of the leaves arising out of the rhizome. So when you plant these, the key on these is not to cover that root, that rhizome. If you put too much excess soil or mulch on them, they tend to rot. These are one of these perennial type plants that come back year in and year out. So one of the keys on this for rule of thumb, if it blooms kind of in late winter or spring, back in the fall, usually about 5 years down the line when it's established, sometimes these types of plants get so thick and they're not going to perform, they're not going to bloom as much. So in the fall time, you might go in there and reopen, redivide, reset the bed and share the extra plants, the rhizomes, with your friends and family, or reset them in other places. So poor man's orchid, like you said, is another name. So this does make a wonderful cut flower. The one that I really like is the bluish purple one as well. And they get their name because they're old homestead, old pass-along type plants that you see in these 100-plus-year-old cemeteries. So you know they're very, very low input plants. March, another Texas superstar plant. This is indigenous to the Edwards Plateau region. And we know that spring is here or just around the corner when we smell the fragrance of this beautiful plant, a grape cooler-like fragrance. And when we see red buds bloom, we know spring is here. Texas mountain laurel is a small tree, large shrub. Depends how you train it. We usually recommend 5 major trunks, north, south, west, east, etc., that we skirt up from the ground about 3 feet or so. Then we have a real nice multi-trunk plant. As you see the bee there, when it's in full bloom, it's very fragrant. Some people also refer to this plant as peanut tree because it's in the legume family. So they have the red hot beans, the mescal beans that are inside of that bean pod. So sometimes when these plants set bean pods later in the summer, going in the fall, we would probably want to take some extra weight off that plant and possibly trim those off if that becomes an issue. The botanical name of Texas mountain laurel is Sephora is the genus. Segunda flora means second flower. That means it sets their primordial blooms, their rat tail blossom blooms in the fall, and then they bloom in the spring. So this is a type of plant that for sure we don't really want to prune or do very little trimming on it at all, except maybe training the bottom and skirting up those main trunks to the desired shape. Now, we have to take caution with native plants like this, particularly when we bring them in these urban situations. This plant and many other so-called native plants, native to where? Texas is so uniquely big and large with so many different climates, soils, rainfall, etc. So this is a very drought tolerant plant once it's established. So this plant and others that we bring into typically in these residential areas and many times commercial areas, we really have to think out what plant you're using, where it's going to be located, and hydrozone our landscapes, meaning that we're not going to plant a plant like this within a St. Augustine area that you're watering often because you're going to have root rot issues. So we really have to think out our plant palette of what goes where and the watering requirements as well. But this is a winner for the fragrance, for the hardiness, and it really does bring a lot of good beneficial insects, bees, and others into the landscape. Citrus. So you see those dates there, April 28th and 29th. So we want to invite you to our citrus online training that we're doing that day. The 28th, I'll be talking about citrus for your patio and landscape. And Molly Keck, our great entomologist, will be doing the insect part of what attacks our vitamin C. So citrus typically blooms January through March, March being the heaviest peak of bloom. You only need one citrus tree, just like a peach, to get fruit set, so you don't need more. So we have a deep history of growing citrus in and around the San Antonio area. We have a lot of Texas superstar plants designated as a citrus tree. So grow them on the patio, grow them in your landscape, and hopefully if you want to learn more about citrus, please attend the April 28th and 29th online seminars that we're conducting. We know how fragrant citrus is. They're pretty nice plants to grow, fun to grow, and they some of the best honey comes from citrus as well. Can't leave out our state flower. Another great year. The Texas Superstar Plant Program, which Dr. Jerry Parsons is the founding father of this program, started with John Thomas, the owner operator of the Texas Wildflower Farm in Fredericksburg, and the beautification of our highways and our landscapes all started with this. So if you look at our state flower here, you can see the florets of this raceme flower on the very bottom. In the middle are kind of a reddish maroon color compared to the up top, which are still white. That designates that we say that that bee went to that flower floret, individual florets, and pollinated it. So those are going to be beans after they set. So Texas Bluebonnet, we set out the seeds like we do other wildflowers that bloom in the springtime, right around September, October, early November, so they bloom in the spring. And then sometimes you can find the transplants, including unique colors like red or maroon, in the January, typically at the local independent nursery. So you can see the little bee doing her job out there. And again, it's a seed pod. So when it gets real hot in late April, mid to late April, the seed pods are beans. When they turn from a nice green bean pod with big seeds forming inside them, then they start going from yellow to a brown, paper-like in texture and touch, and they'll start popping. So you can either let them naturalize in your area or collect the seeds at that stage and then reseed them in and around where you want them specifically in your landscape during the months of September or October. Lavender. Lavender is an awesome plant, very soothing plant. And a lot of people use lavender in their pillowcases to help you get a real nice sleep. The challenge that we have with lavender is it's a very short-lived plant here. If you get a couple years off of it, you're doing pretty good. So lavender, there's different types and selections of lavender. They bloom these beautiful long stem flowers, which make a for potpourri. Munstead is for culinary usage, and then there's other ornamental types. Goodwin Creek, I think, is probably one of the best selections for us to consider growing them here. Maybe grow it in a nice container that drains well, just like rosemary, because they don't like to be overly moist and overwatered. And it makes a real nice plant. Just make sure you don't overwater them and that they get excellent drainage. And it's a bee magnet. You will attract a lot of bees. And high quality honey that they produce is a lavender as well. So look at the different types of honeys, and lavender is an excellent one to consider as well. If you have little kitty cats or your neighbor's kitty cats will come to this plant, particularly when it blooms, is catmint. You notice the square stems of this flower and the half-lipped flower. They're in the Labiaceae family, which are all your mint-type plants. We usually tell people if you use the leaves of an herb, try to pinch early as much and as often as possible, because we only want to let these leafy type herbs start flowering towards the end of the season, not to only attract bees and other beneficial insects, but also to consider collecting the seeds for reseeding the following year. So catmint's a lot of fun. The only challenge with catmint is if you've never grown it before, you do attract a lot of cats, and they really do change their personality and become very, very content and happy. So you just have to kind of have fun looking at the cats when they get in it. May. This is one of the top ranking bee pollinating type plants in the last few years. And it goes by either licorice mint, because it has kind of a licorice fragrance in the foliage, or also referred to as anise hyssop. Again, the flowers are excellent for potpourri. The young tender leaves of the developing plant on new growth has a licorice taste to it. So in a mixed salad, you can add a few of those leaves in there as well. We still have a lot of work here to do to find a more compact selection of licorice mint. Hopefully down the line we'll have one for the Texas Superstar plant program for the state, because this is an awesome, awesome herb. It's a short-lived perennial, or you can directly seed seeds when the soil warms up in March, and or set out transplants if they're available. Again, an excellent plant, a must for your landscape or your for sure vegetable or herb garden. Licorice mint, anise hyssop. We like basil, and there's so many different types of basil. We predominantly plant the Genovese or the sweet basils, and we use the leaves for many different things, pesto and things like that. Again, similar to the catmint and other herbs for their leaves, we let them flower towards the end. Basil honey is awesome. They attract a lot of bees and other beneficial insects. You might even let the wafer-like seeds brown up on the seed stalk and harvest those for next year when it warms up, because it is a warm weather crop. Or let chickadees and other birds come in as well. So that's another thing. We talk about beneficial insects like pollinator insects, beneficial insects, bees, but looking at butterflies and birds is awesome as well. The three B's: bees, birds, and butterflies. Cilantro. We live in San Antonio, so we like to grow tomatoes and onions and cilantro to make some awesome salsa. But cilantro is a cool weather crop. So the ideal plant time is direct seeding in October, or setting out real young transplants. Or if you start in March, getting warm, it flowers and bolts real easy, so you have to cut and keep reseeding every 2 weeks. But October, fall, and winter is really the best time. Cilantro is very beautiful when you let it flower. And usually late March through May, they start flowering from the October planting. They have a very beautiful baby's breath type flowers to them. And as you can see this image, there's a lot of bees that are visible, but the other types of insects that are attracted to your landscape, your herb garden, and your vegetable garden is unbelievable when cilantro boats. Now, if you look real close to this image, you can see some real small green developing little seed balls. Those were turned brown. And the seed that we collect in cilantro, usually around Mayish, June or so when it really gets warm, is coriander seed. So we know coriander seed will be the seed that we plant next October that we possibly collect, or they use it for Mexican cookies and things like that as a real unique garnish for those types of baking cookies and stuff. So we like cilantro and we should let it flower. A lot of people don't let this plant flower, and it even makes a unique bouquet with other plants that you cut from your cut flower garden as kind of a baby's breath substitute that you might look into. There are so many types of salvias that are out there. Look at the square stem of this image. Again, in the mint family, half-lipped flower, the Labiaceae family. So there's annuals and there's tons of perennials that are out there. A lot of different colors. So look for the best ones that are available. Try different ones. Like many perennials, the key is cutting them down early March. And remember, pruning is a dwarfing and rejuvenation process. And a lot of perennials in general, you do need to cut them down about 1/3 at the most, a couple times or so during the year, no later than early September, when they're about 80% bloomed out to encourage new growth and more blooms throughout the season. Pruning is very important in all perennials. So salvias, look for one of my favorite that's out there, which is also a Texas superstar plant. This is one of the best plants, perennial type plants, not only that we put on the market, but the butterflies, the bees, the beneficial insects is unbelievable. This plant is a winner, a long-lived perennial. It loves the sun, takes at least 6 hours of sun, but loves the full sun. Mystic Spire Salvia is a must as a standalone plant on a container on the patio, or a large container with cascading color on the outskirts, or a landscape perennial border type plant as well. If you have not grown this plant as a perennial that blooms probably 9 months or so out of the year, especially if you cut it back 2 or 3 times a year, this is a must for everyone's landscape and the best of the best of all salvias that are on our market to date. Again, you see the butterflies, long bloom to it. During the going into the summer months, a lot of people think this is a lavender flower or even a bluebonnet from a distance. This is a quite a showcase and a winner to consider planting. No, this is not the true lilac of what they plant in the north, which are much fragrant. This is a selection of gray grants from Vitex, both the Show Creek and Montrose Blue selections that have long flower spikes, racemes that are about 12 inches long. So when you buy this plant, try to get them with the big blooms on and make sure you're guaranteed it is true Montrose Blue or Show Creek Texas Lilac Vitex. Again, a Texas superstar plant. We consider growing this, and our recommendations have always been growing as a big perennial plant that usually should be maintained about a 6 foot tall bush and at least 4 or 5 foot wide bush. So you need the space for this. But you know, June, July, and August, folks, is hot. Mid June, the oven turns on, and usually, God willing, it cools down around mid September. But those 3 months of summer are very uniquely hard here. So we can have beautiful blooming plants 12 months out of the year, especially during the hottest time of the year. So this plant here, we recommend chainsawing, cutting it down hard, pretending it froze to the ground, meaning you cut it to the ground March 1st, and then follow the same guidelines of other perennials. When they're 80% bloomed out, cut it back another third, fertilize them a little bit, replenish that organic mulch around them, but do this no later than early September. The key on many perennials, as well, most importantly on this type of plant, is do not let it go to seed. So we can have blooms, blooms, blooms. So follow those guidelines and it'll be a great plant. And this is one of my favorite plants, particularly to attract different species of bumblebees as well. June. This is a musk. Esperanza means hope. And Gold Star is the only selection of Esperanza we want you to plant. Unfortunately, there's a lot of imitations out there and imposters that people struggle with because they don't bloom. If you have a straight upright plant, you're either growing it in too much shade or it's an imposter. So a straight upright plant that maybe gives you a few blooms in the fall time is an imposter. You need to make sure you buy these when they're budded and blooming, very tight, compact plants. These bell-shaped flowers will attract the butterflies, bumblebees, other pollinators. Very, very drought tolerant once it's established, and it's the top three of the Texas superstar plants that we have is Gold Star Esperanza, Mexican bush, Firebush, and Mexican bird of paradise. Those are three must hardy perennials that we should all have in our landscape because they bloom so long, they're very drought tolerant, and of course they bring in so many beneficial insects as well. July. Remember, as a good rule of thumb, tubular-like flowers will not only attract butterflies and other beneficial insects and pollinators, but also hummingbirds. Firebush gets its name because in the fall time, the plant that typically grows 4 or 5 feet tall turns a red color, freezes down in the wintertime, cut it back, clean it up, it comes back, but it comes back late here. The soils really need to warm up. So if it's not back by May 1st, then you probably have to replace it. But it is a very root hardy plant. So a lot of people get impatient and think they're dead. But a great Texas superstar, the must three of Gold Star Esperanza, Firebush, and Mexican bird of paradise. And let's make it 4. Let's add that Mystic Spires Salvia as well. A winner, a must for all landscapes. And it's laughing just like Firebush, Gold Star Esperanza, Mystic Spires Salvia, Mexican bird of paradise. It's laughing when everything else is sweating in the shade. It loves that hot sun. Texas sage, a indigenous native to West Texas. Lynn Lowry, a great plantsman. If you ever get an opportunity to read up on Lynn Lowry and all the plants that he introduced, including Montezuma cypress, Mexican sycamore, just to name a few. He found this Uvalde type Texas sage, or some people call barometer plant, or cenizo. The one to the right is his one he found just in brush country, one day blooming its brains off by itself. And this is a cutting type plant, and we want to look for Lowry's Legacy. Lowry's Legacy or Lynn's Texas sage out there in the market. It's a very compact selection, but the one on the right has large sky blue flowers to it. So we did designate it as a Texas superstar a few years back. Again, you have to hydrozone your landscape. This is a very drought tolerant plant once it's established. So you have to have excellent soil drainage, full sun. You do very little to no pruning on the selection. Let it do its thing. It's a compact one for about 4 feet tall. And again, when it blooms, it has a unique fragrance to it. And then it brings in a lot of good, positive, beneficial insects into your landscape. August, get the kids involved. Go to the Wild Seed Farms website, and right around late April, May, there's so many different types of sunflowers that you can plant. So you can really teach them about heliotropism. Helianthus is the genus of sunflowers, and you can see the flower facing towards the east in the morning, and like a sundial moves to the west in the afternoon. So it's kind of a cool array-like flower. And then this one here in front of us is a mammoth selection, meaning we can also, if the squirrels don't beat you to them, we can also have fun and eat up the achenes, the sunflower seeds as well. But you can see how happy that bee is right there and all that pollen on her hind legs. So again, it's beautiful during the hottest month of the year, which is typically August. And then it's also an edible seed crop, which is an extra benefit for us to consume. Look for mammoth, and there's a lot of small ones that are ornamentals that come in an array of different uh, flower sizes as well as colors. If you want a bee magnet, folks, as you see all these bees on the slide here, coral vine, also referred to as San Diego vine or Queen's crown. Awesome. Blooms its brains out. Usually in the fall, a little bit in the spring, but mainly September to the first frost. You do need a support structure like a chain link fence, trellis, or lattice or something like that. This thing freezes down every year, comes back. It gets a little bit wild once it gets established, but you can do some selective pruning on it as well to keep it kept. But this is a winner. There is a selection out there called Flamingo Red that you might look for as well. That's a dark, dark red one. A little bit hard to find, but I think it's prettier than the standard pink one, and the rare white one there as well. But you want to attract bees and bring bees into your vegetable garden for your cucurbit crops like cucumber, squash, zucchini, and melons. This is a must for the fall planting. A lot of people are interested in milkweed. This is one here is a true North American native that blooms orange flowers in the spring, heaviest in September and October. A small compact plant. My favorite of all milkweeds that really blooms the best is a tropical milkweed, which also blooms in the springtime, typically up to the first frost. But there are some native selections that a lot of people try to find transplants or seed. But remember, there's host plants for monarchs that are coming back from the north down south. So this is good for the adult as well as the last stage of caterpillar development. But look for this, and there's different types of milkweeds to consider in your landscape as well. Marigolds. We always plant marigolds in the springtime. We've designated fall zinnias and fall marigolds that you plant the transplants out in mid to late August. Beautiful, healthy plants. El Dia de los Muertos, All Souls Day, in Latin America, the orange marigold is traditional. So we can really grow the best marigolds, large blooming marigolds, in the fall time. And you can get almost cushion like flowers to them when the plants are growing and developing the flower buds by pinching off every third, fifth, and seventh flower bud and really, really size up big, big cushion-like, mum-like flowers. Thus, its nickname, Merry Mums. Otherwise, they will be nice-sized flowers if you don't do that. But everybody grows again. Marigolds and zinnias that do okay in the springtime, but you should also try some and see how they perform, as it's uniquely grown in the fall time and designated as a Texas superstar plant. You can see this image here, blooming its brains out. This is a fall planting at our children's vegetable garden program that we oversee as stewards of at the botanical garden. Mexican bush sage. Sage is also the same as salvia. This is a perennial, not a culinary type of an edible sage or salvia. Mexican bush sage. This one here is a solid color lavender flowers. Blooms mainly in the fall time. There is a bicolored one that has a little white tips at the end of the flower, which is very beautiful. It tends to bloom a little bit better in the springtime as well. And Santa Barbara, which is much, much darker purple intense than this one, is another great one to look at. And that's blooms in the spring much better than this older selection. But this has also been designated as a Texas superstar plant to cut flowers, long-lasting cut flower, butterflies, hummingbirds, beneficial insects, bees, and other Again, follow the guideline for hardy perennials. A good cutback March 1st and a couple times a year when they're 80% bloomed out, no more than a third. Feed them, replenish that organic mulch, but no later than early September. We mentioned early September for your last major cutback on a lot of plants because you don't want to cut them back too hard because you don't want and late because you don't want to encourage hard growth because we can have cold spells here as early as Halloween, and it might be very detrimental to the overall health of the plant and performance of the blooms. Fall Aster. This goes by a couple names. A lot of people call it the San Antonio Aster or hardy perennial aster or Fricardii aster. And it's a reliable perennial. Comes back year in and year out. A beautiful, unique flower to it that brings in the bees and butterflies. This plant, landscape plants that bloom in the fall as well, like cigar plants, different species of cigar plants. Some of your salvias, a copper canyon daisy, Mexican mint marigold. A lot of these should be cut back around mid-August, right around when summer's finishing. And you want to do the cutback on these probably before early September. Again, the 1/3 rule of thumb. So these plants can really flush out, be very full and very compact because they're very heavy bloomers for the fall season. This plant we've been looking at for years and years, Brazilian Firespike, very good for a shady location, but it really only blooms in the fall time, and it's probably one of the best nectar sources for hummingbirds that are migrating down south because they have a sugar substance at the end of that individual flower there on that spiked flower. So the hummingbirds get a big time energy reserve to help push them down to the south. Loves the shade. Some people also call this Texas hosta or plantain because hostas and plantains that grow in the shade don't really do well here. And the snails, slugs, and roly-polies tend to eat them up, which this plant is pretty much resistant to a lot of that damage. So for a shade area and the last source of heavy nectar, particularly for the butterflies and the hummingbirds, if you don't have this in your landscape or in a nice container on your patio to bloom in the fall time, this is an awesome plant to consider. Brazilian Firespike. You don't need to see this plant. When it blooms in October, November, up to the first hard freeze, you can smell this plant literally probably a mile away. It has such a sweet fragrance to it. Almond Verbena. We grow this as a perennial bush. Typically, it freezes down, comes back when it warms up the following spring. But this thing is unbelievable fragrance to it, as well as all the good little insects, bees, and others that it brings into our landscape. So fragrance is another plus for a lot of these root hardy type hardy perennials. Now, what is this? Square stem, half-lipped flower in the mint family. It's a weed. It's henbit. If you look at this, when there's a massive planting in wild acreage, when it blooms for that a very short period of time of 2 or 3 weeks, it's very beautiful. It's a unique flower, a wave of purple, you might say. But it is weed. Some people don't like this, but it's a very short weed, short life weed. Let it bloom. Maybe just mow it down so the beneficial insects can take advantage of during November when there's not too much blooming here and there, and then just mow it down. And that's all you need to do this type of a plant. So, wildflowers. We like wildflowers. Sometimes weeds can be considered wildflowers as well, particularly if they have unique bloom to them too. This is the best blooming lantana for the shade and for the winter months. This is a species lantana, Lantana montevides. It is a sterile selection, so when you purchase this purple trailing type lantana, make sure you get the sterilist type because it won't set seeds. Low growing, cascading, loves the shade and will take sun. A Texas superstar plant as well. But in December, when not too many plants are blooming, this plant attracts a lot of beneficial insects that are moving around when we have those warm days. Very pretty, and it blooms in the shade. New Gold is a yellow one that we see bloom its brains out all over the place during the summertime. That's a sunny type one. That's a sterile selection that doesn't set seed. That's why they bloom so much, just like this species, purple lantana. Right now, April, May, we see a lot of fruit of this plant. Chinese plum, loquat, and it is a small tree, large shrub type. It blooms in the winter time, and if everything a good mild winter, good pollination, then you tend to have a lot of those yellow edible plums that people like as well. It is an edible crop. It is an ornamental. It's a big leaf type plant. So being a big leaf type plant, it probably needs a little bit extra watering or supplement and good mulching, particularly during the summer months when it gets a little bit droughty out there. So extra water, extra mulch during the summer times will benefit this plant as well. So those are our 12 months, a few plants that we put in today's presentation. Hopefully you are growing some, or after this presentation, you'll add some of these to your landscape. So we can have 12 months of blooming plants throughout the year, as well as many of them being Texas superstar plants. I always like to throw a few bonus plants in. And the next three slides are Texas superstar annuals, seasonal annuals, particularly for spring, summer, fall, up to the first frost color. And these have made the testing trials statewide and are the 2020 Texas Superstar Annuals. Tidal Wave Red Velour Petunia loves the sun. It does attract a lot of pollinators as well. These standalone cascade plants as a hanging basket on a patio in a nice sized container, or a combination planting and maybe a mystic spires in the middle, and maybe let this cascade down. A standalone border plant as well. Tidal Wave Red Velour Petunia. You want to make sure you get the Tidal Wave series. And there's other colors in this series, but Red Velour, without a doubt, made the Texas Superstar cut. Purslane, loves the summer heat. This is a sterile selection of purslane. Unlike the weed that once it seeds, it becomes a big invasive mess. But Cupcake, Yellow, Chrome, and there's about 5 other colors in this series of purslane, a must to add to your landscape. And it's a wonderful plant. It does awesome. And those are available for summer color. Grow it the same way as the petunia. Loves the heat. It freezes down. So it's an annual, but a 2020 Texas Superstar edition as well. If you have a semi-shady area, particularly going into the summer heat, this penthus, there's many penthus. There's a lot of tall ones. This is more of a compact one of the Lucky Star series. It only grows about a foot tall. Likes early morning sun, late afternoon shade, or all-day filtered light, particularly when we hit the summer months. A 2020, one of the 3 annuals that we release. These are available at independent nurseries, so look for them, add them to your array. And another name for penthus is butterfly penthus, because they do attract a lot of cool-looking, unique, different species as well throughout the mid to late spring and the summer, early fall season. Look for this series, Lucky Star Penthus. I think you'll really will enjoy this if you haven't grown penthus before. But this, without a doubt, is the most recent penthus selection that we're very, very happy with. We want to thank you for today's presentation and supporting the extension service. Make sure you go to our MyExtension210 YouTube channel. We will have this archived, as well as other educational presentations that we offer throughout the year. So utilize this, share this with your friends and family. We're here with the extension service to help grow families, to help support the industries out there, but most important, to educate yourselves. So try to grow plants 12 months out of the year. Utilize these websites, please. Aggie Horticulture on the homepage. You can find out more about Texas Superstar plants and all the Texas Superstar plants, and more about vegetables, fruit tree, and gardening and landscape, being better stewards of the environment. If you're not familiar with plantanswers.com, this is an accumulation of Dr. Jerry Parsons' years of service with the Extension Service. A lot of great practical information there and articles from Dr. Calvin Finch as well. The third one is the Bexar County Extension Service website. Please keep an eye on that for our information locally, but also all the educational opportunities that we also offer throughout the year. David Rodriguez, I hope you learned a little bit. That is my email address, and don't hesitate to send me any gardening or landscape questions, inquiries, and if you need something identified, plant, weed, send me good quality images, but please send them as attachments, not part of the email. As always, learn and have fun, and happy gardening, everyone.